If we look at different living things, we can often see family relationships between them. That domestic cat and this tiger, for example. Or between apes and human beings. But there are other similarities, in anatomy for instance, between not so obviously related creatures, which suggest that quite different living things may have derived from a common ancestor, which is of course one of the central ideas in evolution. We call these similarities structural homologies, and we shall be looking at some of these in this film. Consider the forelimb of this lizard. Here it is, and here are the bones. There's the humerus, the ulna, and the radius, and the phalanges, the bones of the hand. This is a quite different animal, a bat. Its forelimbs are its wings, very different from the lizard's forelegs, until we examine their skeleton. The relative sizes of the bones are different from those of the lizard, but they're arranged in the same way. The humerus, the radius, and the ulna again, although this is only a thin splint of bone this time. And the finger bones. Man's forelimbs are his arms. A sheep is a very different vertebrate animal, but if we compare the skeleton of its front legs with that of a man's arm, we find homology again. The human arm, with a humerus, radius, and ulna. And the sheep's foreleg, with the same three bones, differently proportioned, but arranged in the same way as in man. The individual hand bones look very different, but they're still put together in the same pattern in the sheep as in man. Lizard, bat, sheep, man, four quite different animals, yet betraying common ancestry through the homologous arrangements of the bones of their forelimbs. Or consider the forelimb of another very different creature, the paddle of the porpoise. You can see the humerus, the radius, and the ulna. A dog. Its foreleg, too, has the same arrangement of bones. The hand bones in the porpoise paddle, and the same arrangement of bones in the dog's hand. A bird, a pigeon. Does this exhibit the same forelimb homology? Here's the wing skeleton, and once again we can identify humerus, ulna, and radius. And also the finger bones, here reduced in number. The arrangement's a bit obscured by the feathers. This is a house mouse, and it's interesting to look at its complete skeleton, all the bones laid out in sequence. We can see the backbone, the rib cage, the four limbs, and the skull. Compare this skeleton. It looks very much the same, except that the relative sizes of the bones are different, but they're still arranged in the same pattern as those of the mouse. Yet this is the skeleton of a bird, a house sparrow. There's a striking similarity between the skeletons of these two different vertebrates, which again hints at some common ancestry in times long past. In an earlier film, we looked at fossil lobe-fin fishes. Here we must be looking at something early in the history of vertebrates, which has led to the animals we've been examining, whose skeletal forelimbs evolved from an arrangement of bones like these in this ancient fish. The legs or wings of modern vertebrates have just this same pattern of bones, and this is good evidence for an evolutionary hypothesis. A fossil invertebrate, the wing of a giant dragonfly from the Carboniferous period over 300 million years ago. Insect wings also provide us with good examples of structural homology, suggesting again common ancestry for the myriads of different kinds of flying insects found today. The dragonflies are amongst our most primitive flying insects. They have 2 pairs of wings. Is there evidence that the wings of other flying insects have derived from this arrangement of 2 pairs of wings? A lacewing. This belongs to a quite different insect order from the dragonflies, but it has 2 pairs of wings. Another lacewing, 2 pairs of wings again, but a variation on the theme. The rear wings are long streamers, which may be used in courtship display. Related insects were alive at least as far back as the Oligocene, 38 million years ago, as this American fossil shows. This is a marvelous fossil. Here's the insect's body and the lacy wings. Butterflies of the order Lepidoptera have very different wings again, but there are still 2 pairs. The broad wings with their coloured scales may not resemble a dragonfly's, but the basic 4 wings are retained. A beetle. This is a tiger beetle, the head and the rear view. Beetles have 2 pairs of wings, with the front pair modified as hard elytra, wing cases, which fold back over the rear pair of wings. You can see the rear wings underneath. In flight, the elytra, the 4 wings, are opened and held out stiffly. Watch this ladybird, a member of a different group of beetles, but with the same modification of the 4-wing pattern. There are the 4 wings frozen at the moment of takeoff. And a fossil beetle from the Miocene period over 20 million years ago. The elytra can be seen quite clearly. Another insect order, a honeybee, one of the Hymenoptera. Members of this group of insects may appear to have only 1 pair of wings, but in fact there are still 2 pairs, but they're joined by tiny hooks along the wing edge. Wasps belong to the same order and have this same modification of the primitive wing pattern. There are the wings of a common wasp. True flies, the Diptera, really do have only 1 pair of wings, as in this St. Mark's fly. The rear wings have become modified into halteres, most easily seen on a crane fly like this one, 2 short drumsticks which function as balancing organs, vibrating when the insect flies. And here are the true 4 wings. A fossil crane fly, again from the Miocene, but insect fossils are few and far between, and flies must have evolved long before this one lived and died and became preserved. In this rock, there are fossilized soldier flies from the Oligocene over 30 million years ago, but still displaying the yellow coloration on their abdomens. The head and thorax are black. As well as in their wings, insects show other structural homologies which suggest a common ancestry. If we take out the mouth parts from a dead grasshopper, a fairly primitive type of insect, we find that there are 5 components. 2 maxillae at the top right and left, the labium in the middle, and the 2 mandibles for chewing their plant food at the bottom. Now the same 5 mouth parts are found in a very different insect, the honeybee, but their shapes and functions are modified. The labium in the center is now a proboscis with which the bee can reach inside flowers and suck up nectar for food. Watch it plunge the proboscis into this thyme flower. And again. And once more. See the proboscis? The Lepidoptera, this is a meadow brown butterfly, have a different modification. Parts of the maxillae have become a long, flexible tongue, which also can suck out nectar from suitable flowers like this knapweed. But it is still only a modification of the primitive mouthparts. Back to the honeybee. Compare the two mandibles at the bottom with those of the wasp. The wasp's mandibles are strong, hard shears for cutting up other insects. And the mandibles of the tiger beetle, at the bottom again, have become deadly weapons with which this carnivorous insect chews up other insects. Such as this hoverfly. As with the wings, what we find with insect mouthparts are variations on a primitive theme, suggesting that all have evolved from a common ancestor. There are structural homologies in plants too. The magnolia is thought to be a very primitive flowering plant. It provides a clue as to how flowers may have evolved. Look at the spiral arrangement of the leaves below this flower bud. It's thought that the parts of the flower are simply modified leaves, and if we examine the magnolia flower, we can see that the petals too are spirally arranged. The sepals and petals are leaf-like in shape and in texture. They seem to be leaves which have acquired their specialized functions in the flower. The inner parts of the flower are also spirally arranged, suggesting that they have also derived from the leaves, but they now fulfill specialized roles in reproduction. If the stamens are removed, the spiral pattern formed by the indentations where they were attached is very clear. The magnolia provides good evidence for the evolution of flowers from plant leaves. So does this. These are saxifrages, the same species in each pot. Here's the normal flower. Sometimes, as here, a flower develops in which, because of some disturbance of normal growth, the stamens have developed as leaves, a kind of throwback which probably reflects the origins of all flower parts from the leaves of early, non-flowering plants. From primitive flowers such as the magnolia, all the later, often very specialized flowers have evolved by modification of that basic pattern. Flowers are organs of reproduction. Consideration of one important way in which flower pollination is achieved leads us to another kind of relationship, the idea of co-evolution. The whole function of the colored and scented parts of flowers is to attract insects and so achieve pollination by pollen from another plant. Clearly, insects and flowers must have evolved together to make it possible. Dr. Paul Wally of the British Museum of Natural History, London.
It's the insect-plant relationship we want to look at. When we go back in time, something like 300 million years to the Carboniferous period, this is the coal measure period when the coals were laid down, you get pictures of steamy swamps with all these trees around. You have to add on to that picture the insects themselves, not just the big dragonflies, which everybody has seen pictures of these things, but masses of little insects. Now, these insects were feeding on plants, they were flying up to them, and they were landing on them, and they were biting great lumps out of them, just like they do today.
Here's a fossil leaf from the Miocene, about 25 million years ago, together with a fossilized insect recognizable as a plant-eating bug. Today, a familiar sight, the work of a larval leaf miner feeding on the tissue inside a leaf. And the same thing in a Paleocene fossil 60 million years old. Returning to flowers, the fossil record tells us little about their evolution. But here is a fossil flower from the Morning Glory family, fully developed 15 million years ago. This must have been insect-pollinated. Another angiosperm, flowering plant, the flower preserved in amber sometime during the Miocene. You can see the stamens quite clearly. There must have been more primitive flowers visited by insects long before this. A caddisfly from the same period, also trapped and preserved in amber. Once again, there must have been insects which fed on flowers long before this. This one's very important, a moth from the Cretaceous, around 100 million years ago.
Examination of these early specimens embedded in amber shows us that they had jaws, not the sucking mouth parts that are used today to get the nectar out of the flower. They were feeding on pollen. The pollen itself they got from the flowers. We've very little evidence of these early flowers, but we know this is the sort of thing they were feeding on. Now, when you get into the flower to get the pollen out, it's obvious you're going to get covered in pollen. This was one of the earliest beginnings of the insect pollination of flowers. It's just a start on the long process of coevolution up to the time when you get these intimate relationships when the plant can't survive without the insect and the insect can't live without the plant.
Another example of coevolution. Many snakes, like this Australian carpet python, feed on small rodents. Their entire catching and feeding technique is adapted for dealing with these small animals. They could only evolve as the rodents evolved, on which they are dependent. Watch the technique. Now he's got to maneuver the rat into the right position for swallowing, head first. These snakes have evolved a feeding technique perfectly adapted to this sort of prey. Watch. It's now in the right position, head towards the snake's jaws. And there it goes. As the small ground-living rodents evolved, the snakes evolved also to take advantage of them as a food supply. There are many other examples of relationships between one living organism and another which suggest this process of coevolution, leading to the complex webs of adaptation which we find amongst living things today. In the next film, we shall return to homologies, but of a different kind. Although, like our structural homologies, these others too will provide evidence which suggests that an evolutionary process from common ancestors has led to the enormous variety of living things on Earth today.